There's a man who died over a century ago, buried in a London cemetery under a towering stone monument. His body has long since turned to dust, but his ideas had refused to die. They've sparked revolutions, toppled empires, inspired movements that changed the course of human history. Governments have banned his books. Leaders have invoked his name to justify both liberation and oppression. And even today, in our modern world of smartphones and social media, his theories about power, money, and inequality still echo through political debates and protests in the streets. His name is Karl Marx. And whether you agree with him or despise everything he stood for, one thing is undeniable. The world we live in was shaped by the questions he asked and the answers he tried to give. This is the story of how one philosopher's ideas became so powerful that they terrified the most powerful people on earth. When you mention Karl Marx today, you get reactions, strong ones. Some people see him as a prophet who exposed the brutal machinery of capitalism. Others see him as the architect of some of history's darkest regimes. The mere mention of his name can start arguments at dinner tables and in comment sections. But here's what's strange. Most people who have strong opinions about Marx have never actually read his work. They know the legend, the symbol, the political weapon his name has become. But the man himself and the ideas themselves remain surprisingly mysterious. And that mystery matters, because Marx didn't just write about economics or politics. He asked fundamental questions about how societies work, why some people have power while others don't, and whether the way we organize our world is inevitable or just one possibility among many. These questions didn't die with him. They're still alive, because the conditions that troubled Marx, the inequalities, the tensions, the imbalance of power, they never fully went away. They just changed shape. To understand why Marx matters, you have to understand the man before the myth. Karl Marx was born in 1818 in Trier, a small city in what was then Prussia. Today it's part of Germany. His family was Jewish, though his father converted to Christianity to avoid professional restrictions. That detail matters, because Marx grew up in a world where your religion, your class, your family name determined which doors were open and which ones were locked. Marx was brilliant, but he was also difficult, restless, unwilling to accept authority. He studied law at first, then philosophy, immersing himself in the ideas of German thinkers who were asking dangerous questions. Questions about freedom, about history, about human nature. Marx wanted to be a professor, to spend his life inside universities, debating ideas. But his views made that impossible. Universities wouldn't hire him. The government watched him. His writings were considered too radical, too disruptive. So Marx turned to journalism. He began writing articles that openly criticized the Prussian state. He wrote about censorship, about inequality, about the suffering of ordinary people. And the authorities noticed. Newspapers he worked for were shut down. Articles were censored. And eventually, Marx was forced to leave. This would become a pattern. Write something dangerous. Get expelled. Move to another country. Keep writing. Paris, Brussels. Then exile again. Marx was becoming a man without a home, a thinker without a country. But with every expulsion, his ideas grew sharper, more urgent, more dangerous. Marx ended up moving constantly, Paris, then Brussels, and finally London, a city where he would spend most of his adult life. And here's what's remarkable. This man who would write about the struggles of the working class spent much of his own life in poverty. He lived in cramped apartments, barely heated, barely furnished. Several of his children died from illnesses that better medical care might have prevented. At times, he didn't know how he would pay the rent. He relied heavily on financial support from his closest friend, Friedrich Engels, a man whose family owned factories, the very kind of capitalist enterprise Marx spent his life criticizing. The irony was impossible to miss, but this poverty, this constant instability, wasn't just a biographical detail. It shaped how Marx saw the world. He wasn't writing from comfort. He was writing from inside the system he believed was broken. Engels was more than just Marx's financial lifeline. He was his intellectual partner, his editor, his closest ally. Without Engels, many of Marx's ideas might never have reached the world. Engels had spent time in England, managing his family's textile factory in Manchester, one of the epicenters of the Industrial Revolution. And what he saw there shocked him. Workers, including children, laboring for endless hours, dangerous machinery, crushing schedules, wages barely enough to survive, entire families packed into slums, disease everywhere, no safety net. This wasn't progress for everyone. It was prosperity for a few, built on the suffering of many. When Engels shared these observations with Marx, something clicked. Here was the proof, not theory, not abstraction, living evidence of a system built on imbalance. To understand Marx's ideas, you have to understand the world he was trying to explain. Europe was transforming. Factories replaced farms, machines replaced craftsmen, cities filled with workers. This should have been a golden age, an era of opportunity. And for some people, it was. Factory owners amassed fortunes. Industrialists rose to power. But for the workers who made it all possible, life was brutal. 14, 16 hours a day, dangerous conditions, constant exhaustion, children working beside their parents, because one income wasn't enough, and if you got sick, injured, or too old to work, you were replaced. No protection, no mercy. This wasn't a flaw in the system. It was how the system functioned. Marx looked at this world and saw something many economists refuse to acknowledge. He saw exploitation, not as a moral insult, but as a description. Capitalism, Marx argued, was built on a simple division. On one side, those who owned the means of production, factories, land, machines. On the other, those who owned nothing except their ability to work. And because they owned nothing, they had to sell their labor to survive. This gave owners enormous power. They set wages, they controlled conditions, they extracted value. Workers created wealth, but received only a fraction of it. The rest, the surplus, flowed upward, into profit. And that profit, Marx believed, was the true engine of capitalism. But Marx's critique went deeper than money. He talked about something else: alienation. In a world where work is just survival, where you don't control what you make or how you make it, you become disconnected from the product of your labor, from the process of creation, from other workers, and eventually from yourself. Work becomes something you endure, not something that gives meaning. Marx believed humans are fundamentally creative beings, that we find dignity in shaping the world around us. But capitalism, he argued, turns work into a commodity, bought, sold, discarded. And in doing so, it strips away a piece of our humanity. Marx believed this wasn't new. History itself, he argued, was a story of class struggle. Masters and slaves, lords and serfs, owners and workers, different names, same conflict. One group controlling resources, another doing the labor, their interests fundamentally opposed. And this tension, Marx believed, was the real force driving history forward. Not great leaders, not noble ideals, but struggle. And just as feudalism gave way to capitalism, Marx believed capitalism would eventually give way to something new. Marx called this future system communism. But his vision was vague. He didn't design blueprints. He didn't outline utopias. He focused on forces, trends, contradictions. Capitalism, he believed, contained the seeds of its own destruction. Wealth would concentrate, inequality would deepen. Workers would reach a breaking point, and eventually they would revolt. Not because of ideology, but because survival left them no choice. This wasn't hope in Marx's view, it was inevitability, and that belief made his ideas terrifying. If Marx was right, then every government, every factory owner, every ruling elite had reason to fear him. His books were banned, his ideas labeled dangerous, subversive, revolutionary. Because Marx wasn't just criticizing capitalism, he was questioning the legitimacy of power itself. And ideas once planted are hard to kill. Marx didn't lead armies, he didn't seize power, he wrote. And those words proved more dangerous than weapons. In 1848, Marx and Engels published the Communist Manifesto. It opened with a warning. A specter is haunting Europe. The specter of communism. It was short, direct, unapologetic, a call to the working class to recognize their shared struggle, across borders, across nations. Workers of the world, unite. Governments panicked. The pamphlet was banned. Distributors were arrested, but suppression only made it spread faster. Marx had become more than a philosopher. He had become a symbol. Marx never saw the revolution he predicted. He died in 1883, exhausted, ill, largely ignored. Only a handful of people attended his funeral. No monuments, no recognition. Engels spoke briefly, predicting Marx's ideas would outlive him. At the time, it must have felt uncertain, but history was just getting started. Decades later, Marx's ideas resurfaced in Russia, a country Marx believed wasn't ready for revolution. But in 1917, revolution came anyway. The Bolsheviks seized power, claiming Marx as their guide. Soon his influence spread. China, Eastern Europe, Cuba, Vietnam. By the mid-20th century, as nearly a third of humanity lived under governments that claimed to be Marxist. A man who died in obscurity had reshaped the world. But the reality was darker. States built in Marx's name became authoritarian. Millions died. Repression replaced liberation. Power concentrated again. Critics blamed Marx. Defenders blamed those who betrayed his ideas. The truth was complicated. Marx never described how communism should function. Leaders filled the gaps, sometimes with belief, sometimes with brutality, and the consequences were catastrophic. Meanwhile, capitalism survived. It adapted. Revolutions Marx predicted never arrived in industrialized nations. Instead, reforms emerged. Labor laws, welfare states, unions. Some argued this proved Marx wrong. Others argued these reforms only happened because of the pressure his ideas created. Either way, a capitalism endured. And when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, many declared Marx finished. But Marx refused to disappear. Inequality kept growing. Crises kept returning. People kept feeling disconnected from their work, from meaning, from power. And once again, they searched for explanations. Not to start revolutions, but to understand the system shaping their lives. And Marx was still there. Marx wasn't dangerous because he advocated violence. He was dangerous because he challenged inevitability. He argued that systems are human creations, and what humans create, humans can change. That idea, even today, makes the powerful uncomfortable. Marx's body lies buried in London, but his questions remain alive. Was he a prophet? A warning? A mirror? Perhaps all of them. Or perhaps the real mystery is why we keep returning to him. What it says about our world. That a 19th century thinker still feels relevant. As long as people feel exploited, alienated, or powerless, the questions Marx asked will continue to echo. And the mystery of Karl Marx will never truly be laid to rest.